by our board. It's a simple mission statement. I said, create one that Crutchfield can remember, so they scaled it way down. But if you read that, fundamentally what we want to be is catalytic collaborators. We want to get as much work done as we can through our relationships with other collaborators. And we have, and we really focus on values that allow us to be able to develop those kinds of relationships, because we think we can be a whole lot more effective in constructive relationships. And there are a lot of folks that we work with in that fashion. And that causes us to behave in a certain fashion. So we really want to communicate well. We want to work on common goals. We want to be trustworthy. We want to do all of those kinds of things that allow us to have really productive relationships with many other kinds of organizations. I've given you two plans of work. The one in section 2 is the plan of work that we're currently under. The one in section 3 is the plan of work that we're in the process of developing for next year, and it has been approved by our executive committee. It has not been to our full board at this point in time, and I'll come back and talk about this plan of work a good deal more. Section 4 is the economic development budget. When you give us money under that contract, that lays out what we do with that money, where the money comes from, and what we do with the money. It essentially finances the plan of work. I've given you a copy of the recently concluded audit of our chamber, because you need to have that information. Section 6 lays out the City of Killeen and GKCC agreement. And Mr. Foster and I were talking a little bit earlier. Some of our work is influenced by the City of Killeen's strategic planning, in addition to our own strategic planning, which the city participates in. And a number of councils ago, the city created a document called Vision 2030. Is that it, Glenn? And it talks about things like becoming a regional and statewide leader, and influencing the economic development of the region. And you'll see that mentioned in things like this contract, this agreement in section 6 between the City of Killeen and GKCC. Because when you make strategic plans, there are elements of that we can influence and help implement, and so we roll that into our plan. Just as there are elements of what we propose to you that you can help influence. Section 7 is our board of directors roster. Section 8 is an organization chart. Section 9 is a list of manuals. I'll say just briefly a word about that. You won't find many organizations like ours who have developed the manuals that we have developed, both for the Greater Killeen Chamber Commerce and KEDC. And the reason for that is that produces transparency. If someone wants to know how we do business, we've got it described, the processes, the policies in our manuals. Both organizations have what we call a disaster survival notebook. If that railroad station that we live in down there burns down tonight, we've got to be back in business tomorrow. And those documents really lay out the steps we will take and where critical information is kept for both GKCC and KEDC. Policy manuals, leadership orientation manuals, those documents are important. I've given you a copy of our policy manual in that section as well. Our personnel manual, if you want to see how we treat our employees, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, and the history of the organization, all of which you can look at your leisure. If you would indulge me, I'd ask you to join me in section 3, which is the plan of work we're now developing. And let me say a word or two about where this came from and why it's a little different than the previous one and why I wanted to single it out to you. In this one, what we have attempted to do is provide you with funding sources. Because when we develop a plan of work, we develop a plan of work for economic development, but also the chamber functions and purposes for which we exist. And you need to know where those resources are coming from, because you need to know that you're not paying for chamber functions, you're paying for economic development functions. So you can look at activities in here and get a feel for how we resource those things. In some cases, it might be coming from KEDC, where I mentioned to you that master plan for the museum, those kinds of things. So this document is a little different. It's also different in that it has evolved from the plan of work we're currently in now, because there are a number of things that are going to be different in this coming year. For example, Colonel Perry is going to talk about the BRAC process and how we prepare for the BRAC process. And we know we need to prepare for a BRAC process. Well, if the chamber is going to participate in that, it's got to be included in our plan of work, and it will be. A session of the legislature will meet in January of this year. There are activities that we engage in as a result of that. That will impact not only our plan of work, but our budget. As an example, we will do our third or fourth legislative tour this year. When I say legislative tour, I mean that we send 2 buses down to Austin with our staff members on it. And we load those buses up with members of the legislature and their staff, about 120 or 30 of them, and we bring them back to Killeen. And for many of them, the first time they've ever been here. We show them our university, Central Texas College. We show them our community, and they spend the rest of the day on Fort Hood. We do that in concert with our members of the legislature, and they are the host for it, but we organize it, pay for it. The purpose is it helps them to get legislation approved that benefits us. For example, the legislation appropriation request for the 3rd building at Texas A&M University will be considered by the legislature this year. We think it will be helpful for a number of them to have seen Fort Hood and seen the university, so that they have some fire in their belly about what it is we're trying to get done. And you will all be invited to come out for a period of time, and then there'll be a reception in the afternoon. It is a very popular event. Our members of the legislature are very pleased with it. We try to make it as moving as we can for the members of the legislature, because we're a very unique community because of Fort Hood, and we want them to experience that. That will be reflected in our plan of work. We will be developing a fairly comprehensive development agreement this year with a multi-use development on the east side of town. We're going to assist your city attorney with some additional legal help by using an attorney who has developed these kinds of documents before and who has been skipped by developers before and understands all of that process, so that we wind up with a multifaceted development agreement that produces a multi-use retail, commercial, perhaps residential product that winds up looking like it was promised to us that it would look, in return for some incentives that we would put in place to do that. So this plan of work is a little different than the one we're under now. If you'll page with it through me to the overview, if you don't read anything else in this document, I would ask that you read that document at some point in time, because it really spells out how we got to where we were at. And just let me give you a feel for the history of that. When I came here 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago, there was concern about the economic development program and its productivity in the community. And folks who were here before I held a stakeholders meeting. Members of the City Council, KEDC, KIF, our Board of Directors, and others. I wasn't here, so I can't describe it in its entirety for you. Substantial number of people, some of you may have been in it, I know others were there. They were asked to lay out what are the 5 overriding priorities that we have to get addressed in this community. And the group, and again, I can say this because I had nothing to do with it, did a remarkable job boiling down hundreds of things to 5 fundamental issues that they wanted focused on in this community. And I don't know that I've seen another stakeholders meeting produce the succinct results that group produced. And they're stated in this page, to collaborate with others to ensure that Fort Hood is fully utilized. At that point in time, fully utilized was 50,000 soldiers. We have a little different perspective on it now, but that's one of them. Capitalize on the Killeen Fort Hood Regional Airport. Focus on programs that will lead to the creation and recruitment of jobs with competitive wages in the service, manufacturing, and retail sectors. Interesting thing about retail is, before the passage of the sales tax for economic development in the state of Texas, no one recruited retail, because the philosophy was, build it and they will come. Grow your economy, add more rooftops, the retail will come. Well, retailers got wise. They said, we're producing value for these communities. It's called sales tax. And if we locate in their community, they're going to get more of it because we're going to collect it for them. So they're going to provide us incentives for the value that we provide. And those of us that want retail, and we all want retail because it drives 50% of your budget, close to it, it gets real competitive now because retailers know what they're worth. And so you've got to have, retail migrates in a very purpose-driven fashion, and incentives are part of the game now. Target, for example, does not buy property. You give them property if you want them to locate in your development. Sales tax rebates through agreements with the cities have become commonplace. So you've got to recruit actively, and you've got to provide incentives for retail if you want it to come. And that's how the sales tax impacted all of that. Assist in establishing Texas A&M University Central Texas as an upper-level standalone university. That has significance in a number of ways, and I'll get into a little bit more of it in a minute. Only one of which is academic. The economic development impact of the creation of this university through the incubation of emerging technologies in this community will profoundly change this community. It will produce the jobs and the companies of the future here if we're smart and we go about it in the right way. And the last one, which is proven to be a tough one, is improve the image of the community and assist in the development of a brand for the community. Folks who live here are pretty bad about shooting ourselves in the foot. And I wish we quit doing that. And when I came here, people were really in an uproar about an article that appeared in Texas Monthly, the Wall Street Journal, one or the other, that referred to Killeen as a scruffy little military town. And if I heard that one time, I heard it 100,000 times. What do we do to change that? So we have really engaged in a process of bringing about deliberate change in our image. And it's absolutely critical for us to get that done as a community. And you can help us do that. Museum's a very good example of that. We're a very unique community. And we need to celebrate that uniqueness. We need to market that uniqueness, and we need to be proud of it. So we need to sell ourselves on that internally, and we need to sell the market externally on that. So those were the 5 things, and we've built all of our plans of work around those 5 things. We've modified them a good deal over the year because we've done a lot of work subsequent to that. If you look down below that, you'll see the 2 major documents that we created. One was really a long-term economic development strategic plan called Operation Economic Transformation. That was a collaboration between the city and the chamber. We went and got money from the Office of Economic Adjustment in the Department of Defense, who provides funds to communities impacted by military installations. They would not give that money to the chamber. They gave it to a political subdivision. So the city of Killeen became the sponsoring organization. I became the project manager. They gave us $175,000. We went and hired a consultant and produced what I think is a remarkable strategic planning document. Still use it today. Subsequent to that, and it was that document that introduced us to the notion that there is a major economic transformation occurring in this country. It's occurring in this world, and we are subject to it. And that is the impact of global economy, which really began to occur in about the mid-1980s. And it first started happening when a lot of us figured out that there's value in trade. And if we ever want to become the center of the business universe, we've really got to enter into some trade agreements. And I'm one who was very active because I lived in South Texas at the time in the passage of the Free Trade Agreement. The Free Trade Agreement essentially links Mexico, the U.S., and Canada, and eliminates tariffs and quotas and those kinds of things, and over time has opened up those three countries to trade. And there were many other trade agreements that the country entered into at the same time. So we began to move, same time the European Union was being created, we began to move into a global economy. At the same time that was occurring, we had these technical developments begin to occur, like the internet. First I heard of the internet was in 1984. Really began to become a commercial reality there then. So, and we began to pave the world with fiber. So we have this situation where information is becoming accessible. It literally moves at the speed of light, and it moves globally. So for folks who were living in places like Alice, Texas, Harlingen, Texas, and Corpus Christi, the competition became not the people down the street, but the people around the world. And that had a big impact on us. And it was Operation Economic Transformation that really pointed out that we are moving from an agricultural, industrial economy to a knowledge-based economy, a far different kind of economy. And that led us to change our plan of work to account for this knowledge-based economy that we're going to encounter. And we talk about some of those trends in there, and that really led us to this plan of work. So let me thumb through the plan of work real quickly. Again, you can read this at your leisure. We created a sector chair for organizational advancement. Again, that's where our manuals are created. That's where we really went out to recruit a diverse board. We get involved in strategic planning, those kinds of things in that section. Our reporting process is housed there. One of the things you receive from us as a council member is a monthly economic development report, a board report. We send it to our board members, and it will be patterned after this plan of work. So when you look at this plan of work and you look at that document, you will see what we've gotten done on this plan in that month. So you'll receive that. Staff development is another thing we do under this. I put something in here that I think is important. The only thing worse than training staff and having them leave is not training them and having them stay. And at this day and time, the way this economy moves and technology is advancing, you've got to constantly train staff. If you don't, and invest in technology, if you don't, you get behind. So that's organizational advancement. The second sector is military relations. And you can see under Task A what we do in that area: promote the importance of sustainability of Fort Hood and defense-related industries, take advantages of opportunities to expand Fort Hood. You see our relationship with the Heart of Texas Defense Alliance. You see the DoD Office of Economic Development listed there, economic adjustment. There are some other projects that we have in mind with those folks in the future, having to do with incubating emerging technology and regionalization and those kinds of things. Identify and facilitate and collaborate with others to build military and non-military projects. It is imperative that in a period of DOD dollars shrinking, that we identify projects to co-invest in with Fort Hood. The other branches of the services are doing it. The Army has not. Bill and I have talked about this a lot. It may be a factor in the BRAC process. And there are ways to build projects that are mutually beneficial, where you can reduce one party's investment through the introduction of another party who will benefit from the project. And we're rapidly looking for those. Good example of that we have in this community. It's the Killeen Fort Hood Regional Airport that's built on a military reservation to serve a military population and a civilian population operated by the city. Another good example of that is the fact that KISD provides all of the schools on Fort Hood. Many places that's not the case. Those kinds of things give us an advantage in the BRAC process. Diversify the mission at Fort Hood. When I came here, people said, you got to diversify the economy, Crestfield. We're pretty dependent on Fort Hood. Colonel Perry is going to tell you how dependent economically we are on Fort Hood. The reality is, I don't care what you do outside the fence, we're still going to be dependent on Fort Hood. So the strategy is help them diversify their mission so that other missions are introduced at Fort Hood, and they'll be better off and we'll be better off. The second runway is a good example of that. Building a strong relationship between the community and Fort Hood with the U.S. Army. I'll list you some examples of that. Our Central Texas chapter of AUSA, and I'll talk just a little bit more about that in a minute. The Mounted Warfare Foundation and the Museum and Soldier Center. We, along with others, have had a very active role in planning that project and putting all of the elements in place for it to succeed. And through KEDC, there have been a public commitment of funds of about $1.4 billion for 3 years. That will produce a capital investment that I suspect will be about $90 million. Pretty good return on the investment. It will produce some economic benefits that aren't included in that $90 million. Projection is the first year it will generate 240,000 visitors to this community who will stay in our hotels and eat in our restaurants and pay hotel motel tax. But it does a whole lot more than that, in my notion. And this is why a project like this really touches a lot of things that we have to get done. It really, one of the things we've learned about place design, and a couple of you folks participate in that, is there's been a lot of work done to determine the attributes important to the creative class. And the creative class is really a group of folks much younger than me for the most part, who drive the knowledge-based economy. They're the innovative, technically competent, educated folks that really drive that. They do their work on the internet, and they can really live wherever they want to live. So it's very important that we understand the 8 elements, and our place design team, which is included in this plan of work, has produced 6 white papers on place design, and one of those has to do with the creative class, and it lists those 8 elements. And the reality is, when Richard Florida did this research, he wasn't thinking about military communities, but of those 8 characteristics: access to technology, immigration, low barriers to entry, tolerance. We have them in spades because we're a military community. What we don't have, it's extremely important, is authenticity. And we get there through projects like downtown redevelopment and the museum. The museum really tells folks who we are and what we're about if we do it correctly. Makes a tremendous statement about what makes us unique as a community, and that's extremely important to the creative class. That's what place design is all about. And it's through projects like that that we'll be able to attract people who will create and drive knowledge-based industries forward for us. We did some branding work on establishing a brand for the community, and one of the things we got were some branding platforms. And the folks that did that work described us this way. Said, we're a place where the character of the American soldier permeates the community so that freedom